In today's episode, I'm taking apart the Canon 5D Mark II. This is an amazing camera. Still now beats lots of new cameras, and people do prefers it. People still buys this camera even if it's not anymore available as new, and also people prefer to fix it. So the first step, let's start with the disassembly. The first step is, as always, the battery. Don't forget the battery inside your camera while you're about to take it apart. Next is the battery door. Next step is by taking off the rubbers. I'm starting with the back, the rubber of the back cover. And on some cameras, since you may start taking off the rubbers for the first time, it might be a bit harder. I do recommend to use a hair dryer or heating gun, not for long, couple of seconds, just to warm up a bit the rubber, in order to the rubber and the double tape, take it off easier. As some of the viewers, they might notice I'm using the same tool every time. This is because I do like this this plastic tool. It's just because it's easy to insert the tool, and also the adhesive, the double tape, doesn't get stick. Apparently, I noticed that doesn't get stick on the plastic. This kind of a plastic that is on the tool, and yeah, I do prefer this tool. Very gently. You have to be patient in order to not leave any kind of trace of the double tape. Okay, so the next step is by taking the left side cover. By taking this screw, you just take off the battery, the memory battery or data battery compartment. The battery is rechargeable, so usually it should hold for, I believe, 10 or 15 years. In case you leave you don't use your camera for a very long time, months or years, usually by adding a full battery inside the camera, leaving the battery, the main battery of the camera inside for a week, the data or memory battery should recharge. If it doesn't recharge, definitely you have to replace it. Okay, so these are the last two screws for releasing the side. By the way, keep track of the screws, the length, the type. Put each screw aside. As always, I'm trying to mention, probably I'm going to make a video in next talking about type of screws. I have people asking me about. So again, using the plastic tool. This is the cover. If you need to replace it, now you know how to do it. Next step is by taking off the back of the camera. And I usually start with the top screws. I try to keep a kind of a sequence on taking off the screws, In that case, it helps to memorize better which screws, where it stays, and also, as I said, probably I'm going to make another video on explaining how to keep track of your screws easier than you know, some other options there are on the I don't know, on the YouTube. There's lots of people has his own way to keep track of the screws. I've seen like marking on paper, adding a double tape and put the screws on the tape, which is not bad at all. But to me, since I'm doing this very often, quite often, like open up cameras, I kind of make a personal way to keep track of the screws. This last screw is different than the other last two ones. Is very the head is very thin, so be careful not to mix them. Okay, so now once we we took all the screws out, the next step is by taking the cover. Be careful when you take the cover off. Don't pull it all the way up. Just do it as I'm doing. And disconnect these connection points, which this is for the buttons, and this one is for the LCD screen. Okay, so this is it. This is the back of the Canon 5D Mark II. Next, I'm gonna take apart the components of the back. By the way, you can skip this step by selecting it from the timestamps of this video. So the next step is by disconnecting this connection point. So what I'm doing here, I'm just disconnecting. This is the left buttons of the back of the camera, just to preparing to start the disassembly. I usually, as always, I'm trying to make a kind of a order on taking apart the camera. I'll always try to take in kind of an order, not to create confusion. And this is, I believe this is the easiest way. So by taking these screws, you can take the, as I said, left buttons of the camera, of the back of the camera. So if you have problems with the buttons, if the buttons are not working, or you need to push very hard in order to make any kind of send any commands on the button themselves, you have to replace this flat button contact. By replacing this, you may fix your problem. Also, the other problem that may be causing this issue, it may be the rubber itself. This rubber here, if it might be damaged, it might be broken. Sometimes happens to get broken. And also the buttons. These 4 buttons, plastic buttons, cover buttons, whatever you want to call them, are the same, except the last one, which is slightly different, but you can notice because it has a little leg. When it shows you, it tells you that it will guide you, so you cannot put it by mistake. And this is for the top button for the print one option, so also taking off this one. Okay, so next step is by taking off the LCD, but first we have to disconnect these connectors, these flat cables. As you can see, it comes off quite easily. Before reaching the LCD screen, we need to take the LCD driver off. Also, if you have problems with your LCD, if you get strange colors or you get no image at all, it might be a problem with the LCD driver instead of the LCD. Definitely if the problem happens suddenly and not because you you didn't create any pressure on the screen, or you I don't know, you didn't knock off the camera in the way that had hit the screen itself. So this is the LCD driver. Also may happen that water doesn't seem, because it seems to be hidden, but you might get water at that point, and also in that case needs to be replaced. Okay, next step, I'm taking off the screws for releasing the LCD screen. As always, keep track of the screws and the way the order I take off the screws. Okay, so now the screen it's free, the LCD is free. Try to avoid touching the front of the LCD, otherwise you might leave some trace, some dirt, trace, oil from your hand, and by doing so it will be quite hard to get it back to the same clean state. And yeah, be careful with that. Okay, so next step, I'm preparing to take off the selector wheel, and this is you must be careful from now on. You must be careful because there are some points, some connection brush which are quite easy to damage. But I see this like an quite often issue. You might get the wheel. You may not do the proper selection or movement. So in case that happens, you have to either open this up first of all to see what's the state of it, and if it's damaged, just replace the damaged part, or if it's dirty, try to clean and re-oil. There's a special contact oil, but there's a electrical contact oil I do recommend to use. Be careful not to touch that brush contact. If you find this like difficult and you have to do some other steps to take some other parts off to reach something else, I do recommend to take the this is the switch, by the way. This is the switch. I'm preparing to take off the switch button, and as you can see, there's a tiny sphere I was saying that if you see that the brush part, like something that you might risk to touch it, yeah, I do recommend to take it off before doing these other steps. So I'm taking this brush contact next. As I said, you can do this step much earlier in order to avoid touching and damaging this part. It might be hard to find this part as a replacement. Just follow these steps very gently. You have to take this part off. I'm just taking everything apart, most of it, just to show you, in case you need something, you need to disconnect something on the back of this back cover. So now the selector wheel is free. This metallic part is only by giving you when we rotate, to give the steps, the feeling of the steps. So that is made by that metallic part. This is the front wheel, and basically we have the cover, and yeah, there's not much left actually. So next I'm going to prepare to take the cover off. This cover, you can replace this part by taking the whole, by, I don't know, you might be able to find the whole part as replacement. Okay, so as you can see, this part comes off like this. I do recommend to buy, if you need to replace, to do anything, any kind of work on this, I rather recommend to take the whole part rather than replace a single parts of that group. Beside the fact that it might be quite difficult to find the parts individually, it's also quicker and easier to replace the whole group. Okay, so next step is by taking off the speaker. Usually the speaker never gets damaged or gets faulty. One of the most common issues, it might be water going into the holes, and that may damage the speaker. Okay, so next step, continuing with the disassembly of the camera. Next step is the back cover. These screws are different, so be careful with them. The next three ones are all the same. Don't remember exactly. I believe even the fourth one is the same. This one definitely is different. As you can see, it's slightly longer and has a different thread. So this one is pretty much the same as the ones before, the very first ones. There's another screw here. There's no way to mess around with the screws. As you can see, this screw is completely different. It's white in color and has a different length and thread. One thing that you need to keep in mind when something doesn't come off, usually it has to come off very easy. Everything on these cameras are usually coming very easy. You don't need to make any kind of force or put any kind of pressure or put any kind of tool. Try to do it by hand just to understand the movement and the need of the pressure and the force you need to make. Okay, so the next step is by taking off the front cover. By disconnecting this, you're gonna be able to release the front cover. This wire basically connects with the microphone, with the mic in the front of the front cover. Again, I start with the top. This is a personal preference, so you don't necessarily need to do the same, but to me it's much easier to keep track of the screws. These screws are quite hard to take them off, so definitely you need to have the right screwdriver, otherwise you may risk to damage the screws, the head of the screws, and if that happens you might not be able to open up the camera, or you might need to in some way to cut or drill that screw head in order to be able to take off the part. So these screws are different. They're all different. This has a different thread. Here you need to disconnect these two screws, and for now not all of them. We're gonna disconnect the other two screws later when we're gonna need to release the side of the right hand side cover, which is the one for the memory door. Also, these screws are different. Okay, so the front cover now is free. In case you need to replace the front cover, now you know how to do it. Okay, so the next step, I'm preparing to take off the top cover, and we need to disconnect this flat cable. The eyepiece adjustment knob, viewfinder adjustment knob. Definitely we need to take this off, otherwise we're not gonna be able to take the top cover off. This screw, by the way, these screws are different. This one from the right hand side is different than the one on the left. Taking off the top cover is fairly easy, but definitely in order to reach this point, you have to take take in consideration all the other steps in order to be able to take this cover off. As you can see, this screw is hidden in that position, and now our top cover is free. If you need to replace the top cover, now you know how to do it. Next step, I'm gonna take apart the components, the main components of these the top cover. Some of the components I will explain a few things about them, and some other I will take them off. For example, this selector, in order to take it off, you have to take this middle screw, but you have to be very, very careful. Otherwise, you're gonna broke the head of the screw, and you're not gonna be able to take the screw off because this has a thread lock. So the best way to take this off is by hitting the screw head with the soldering iron. That's the only option, the only way you can release the screw. Otherwise, you're gonna create damage. Okay, so next step, I'm gonna take off the selector wheel, the one that selects the aperture on your camera on the menu. Also, this one get damaged quite often. First, the main reason is moisture and rain, water, but it's quite easy to replace. This part is held by 3 screws. In this case, the screws are all the same. I do recommend, before taking off the screws, do the same I did when I prepare myself to take this part off, and that is by disconnecting the flat cable. Otherwise, you may risk to damage the flat cable. Okay, so this is the selector, and also this is the mechanical button that sends a signal to the camera to take the proper shot. Okay, so next step, I'm preparing to take off the LCD, the top LCD, the one that sends shows you information about the settings. The most common problems with this, the failing of this top screen, is by knocking off the camera into something and damaging the screen, or otherwise, again, moisture, not much moisture, but more water damage. These screws are all the same. Again, remember to disconnect the flat cable before taking off preparing to take off the part. I usually do prefer to disconnect the flat cable first, and then taking off the proper parts. So this is the screen. I do recommend to get the whole group as it is assembled, the way it comes off, and not the only LCD glass screen. If you know what to do, is it possible to replace it? But if it's something, you're about to doing this for the first time, definitely you have to take the whole group of the screen. Okay, so next step is by taking off this button rubber. and the button themselves. These are the buttons again. These button caps are different, but there's no wrong way to put them back. Each one has his own way to be put it back. This is another part, another section of the buttons. This, I don't believe it ever came damage. The little one, these three ones is the little one is for the light, but these three ones is just for different selection, different options. But it's very easy to see which one where it has to go. Okay, so back to the initial problem. Back to this. I wanted to show you on another camera what happened. I tried to take off the screw and I wasn't able. I just damaged the screw head. So let's say we managed to open up this. I just wanted to continue this step. This is the way to release this wheel. Be careful because underneath there are these brush connectors. And next, in case you need to release your selector to replace it, in case it's damaged or whatever reason you need to work here. Now you know how to do it. Okay, so let's continue with our teardown. Next step, I am taking the side, the right hand side cover is the one for the memory card. So in order to reach, to be able to take this part off, you have to do all other steps. Otherwise it will not come off. And also you may risk to damage the switch that detects the opening and closing of the door if you want to do it, if you don't follow all the steps. Okay, so continuing with the teardown, next step is by taking off the motherboard. I'm basically disconnecting all the connections, the left connections, the connections left. There's a tape over here. You have to very gently, carefully. This tape is quite strong, so you need to be very gentle. As you can see, this is very strong, a very strong tape. The reason of this tape is to keep in place the two connections, these two flat cables where the tape stays on is for the image sensor. So definitely any kind of vibration, it may disconnect them. The way they are made, it may disconnect them. So the manufacturer chooses to put a tape to ensure are not coming loose. So continuing with the taking off the disconnecting the flat cables. Canon had the brilliant idea to put a hole in the middle of the flat cables, which other manufacturers, other brands, they don't have this this kind of option. So the risk of damaging the flat cables, it's definitely slightly higher. Disconnecting this other cable. Okay, so next step, once we released all the connections, next step is by taking off the screws. These screws are all the same. There's another hidden screw here. And another one down here. When we take this off, be careful because there's another connection point that needs to be released. So you have to turn the motherboard in this way, and then we can release this connector. Okay, so now our motherboard is free, and now you know how to replace it. Okay, so the next step, I'm taking the power unit, taking the power unit off, preparing to take the power unit off. The screws that holds this the DC-DC power are not the same, are 3 screws, which are all, I believe they're all different. Before you disconnect the old screws, remember to disconnect this cable. This screw is different. And there's another screw hidden here underneath this flat cable. Be careful when you manage these flat cables. This one is slightly shorter, so definitely the whole 3 screws are different. Again, there's another connection point underneath the power board, which is this one. This is the connector that comes directly from the battery. This is the power unit. in case you need to replace it. Now you know how to do it. Definitely you have to follow the other steps in order to reach this point. You might not need necessarily to take the motherboard, the PCB, the motherboard of the camera, the main board of the camera in order to disconnect this point. But if you find it difficult, I suggest to follow the steps. Okay, so next step, I'm preparing to take off the bottom board, which basically it's a second power board, but in this case this commands and powers the shutter unit and the mirror box and everything, the connection to the lens and the autofocus and some other features. The screws on this plate, this is the plate that not only protects the bottom board, it also has the screw for the tripod. So if you have a damaged thread on your tripod, on your camera, the thread on your camera where you put the tripod, this is the plate that you have to replace it. These screws, the first four screws are the same. These other two ones are different. Okay, so now that we took all the screws out, this is now we have released the plate, and next step is by taking off the bottom board. This board commands the shutter unit, the mirror box, the autofocus, and also communication with the lens, power to the lens, and some other small commands. And this one, since it's on the bottom side, is quite exposed to water. So in case water goes inside from the bottom side of the camera, this will be the first step that the water will reach, and it may damage this board. Other than that, the board itself, it's quite good, very reliable, doesn't give any kind of issues. So again, what I'm doing now, I'm disconnecting before taking the screws out. I'm disconnecting all the connection points, ensure everything is disconnected properly. I usually, as I said, I prefer do the disconnections first, do the disconnections and then the screws, because in that case you avoid creating potential damages. Okay, so now it's time for the screws. All the screws, I believe all the screws are the same. Actually not the front, the back screws, the first one was different, and the second one, the first one was different than the second one. The first one and the third one are the same. The second one was different. Again, this one is different because the ones on the back are screwed into the metal. The ones on the front are screwed in the plastic, so definitely they have different thread and length. Okay, so now that the screws are out of the way, the board is free. So in case you need to replace this board, now you know how to do it. Definitely there are lots of steps to reach this point. So the next step is by taking off the image sensor. The image sensor for calibration, for holding the sensor, has three screws, but there are also some extra screws. This one that I took off is for the ground. This camera has two type of screws, depends on the year of manufacture. In this case, these screws are screwdriver head, but on some others they are in torch. I believe it's a T6, but in this case it's a Phillips screwdriver. So this is an important point. Once you open up this point, this image sensor, these screws, you will need to calibrate the sensor in order to get the distance, the right distance back in the same position. Otherwise, you will losing the distance between the image sensor and the end of the lens, and that by doing so you will not gonna you might have problems with the focus point. There's another way to keep the image sensor in position. I might do a video and soon. Is by people also use, not everyone has possibility to have a bench for calibrating the sensor, but the other option is to count the spins of the screws and keeping the screws in the same identical position, and you can get very close, if not same, to the same position of the image sensor. This camera is one of the first versions, so Canon used some spacers that are rubber spacers, and so the black part is rubber spacers and the metal part is just a spacer to hold everything in place. As you can see, the spacers are coming off. These spacers later on they were replaced with spring version, which is much better than these ones. Okay, so next step is by taking off the mirror box, and by taking off the mirror box you have to take some screws, couple of screws off, and these ones here are still for releasing the mirror box. So basically it's separating the mirror box from the middle frame of the camera. Okay, so there are some others on the back. These two ones on the bottom here, this one and the one on the left. By the way, these screws are the same, at least the ones I took off by now. If you have problems with the middle frame, this is the way to do it. Definitely you have to follow all the other steps in order to replace the middle frame. The middle frame is quite fragile, it's very easy to bend, so now you know how to do it in case you need to replace it. Keep in mind that the image sensor needs to be recalibrated either to replace the middle frame or fix or replace the shutter unit. These are the last two screws. As you can see, they are different. I prefer to take them last. So at this point, the middle frame is free. Every time, try not to create any kind of force. If something holds, try to understand where that happens and why it happens. Don't create any force. If you are about to lose your temper, just make a pause and do it again later. Okay, so on the middle frame, we have some components which the most important are the switches of the one of the battery door, the one that switch off, turn on and off the power on the camera each time the door is open and closed, and the same for the memory card. Every time you open the camera, you open the door of the memory card, the camera shuts off, so goes in safety, in standby. So if you have problems with that two switches, one of the two switches, this is the way to do it. You need to reach this point and disconnect all these other parts. So basically what I did now, I just took the screws to release the battery compartment. On the battery compartment we have the two switches, which I'm going to show you now. We have the two switches and the battery connection. So this one on the bottom is for the battery door. So every time the battery the door is open, this switch release, and that shuts off the power on the camera. And the same on the memory card, this one as well. When it's open, usually it's basically shuts off the camera, turns off the camera. In order to replace it, you have to do these other steps. By taking off this plate. These screws are all the same. As you can see, the plate with the flat electronics came off. There's a double tape underneath this switch. I do recommend to use a heat gun or a hair dryer in order to take it off easier. You have to be very gentle over here, otherwise you're gonna damage this point. As you can see, I'm giving enough time of the in order for the double tape to release without creating any kind of pressure. You don't necessarily need to separate these two parts. You might find, it's very probably you might find them together. So this is the memory card switch. There's a spring. Keep in mind the position of the spring. Has his own position. Next, I'm gonna, just to show you, I'm gonna take this the battery contactor, where the battery pins goes and basically connects to the battery. The only way you need to take this off is because it might be due to the moisture or oxidation. Usually oxidation is caused by water. So if you need to replace this part, this is the way to do it. Definitely there's lots of steps to reach this point. You might be able to find the whole part in one as one group, and you might not need necessarily to buy only that part. So next I'm gonna take the second switch, which is the one on the bottom. This one also has some double tape, and as always I do recommend to use a heat gun or hair dryer to soften the adhesive on the tape. If you don't, you have to be very gentle, very gentle. So this is a plate. This is basically the plate that holds the battery in position and doesn't make the battery falling off from the compartment once you open up the door. This kind of a flat cable is very very fragile and very easy to damage. Here the double tape, I realized, is slightly stronger, so again you have to be very careful. If this switch is damaged, also it might happen that it gets damaged. You may be able to replace it. You can replace the switch itself. That's a kind of a more difficult operation, but definitely you can do that if you have experience. I might be able in the future to start showing you how to do kind of some kind of solderings on some components, electronic components. Okay, so next there are a few components left here. I'm not gonna take everything off. I'm just gonna show you a few things, and the most important is the jack, which this one is the microphone jack. So it may happen to this one happens to get damaged quite often, so it's enough to release this point, and then the two screws, the two wires and the two screws on the front. If you need to replace this cable for whatever reason, this is fairly easy. So yeah, next step, I'm gonna focus on the mirror box. So next I'm gonna take the shutter unit off. In the shutter unit, you have to disconnect these 2 points in order to release the shutter once you take the screws off. Otherwise, if you take the screws off and then you keep this, leave this in place, you might get it might be a bit difficult. You might risk to damage the shutter once you release the shutter from its place, and then if you try to release the two flat cables to connections, you might risk to create some damage. The shutter unit, if you get an error on the I believe it's error 30, I'm not 100% sure at the moment. If you get the error, that means the shutter needs to be replaced. But instead, if you don't have any error on the shutter, but the blades of on the shutter for whatever reason get damaged, you might notice that either by lifting the mirror on the mirror box from in the front of the camera, but also from the exposure, you might notice there's the exposure is different. So the reason why that happens, it might be caused by damaged a shutter blade. So in that case, it's repairable. So you need only to replace the shutter blades. I'm gonna do a video next sometime soon. I'm gonna do a video showing you how to replace the shutter blades. I'm gonna do a general video, but also in the future I'm gonna try to create a video of each model separately, because each shutter has its own way to do it. So probably I'm gonna do that in the future. If you think that is something that might be useful, just let me know on the section, on the comment section below. Okay, so going forward with the disassembly of the shutter unit, I'm just taking this plate off just to show you how to do it. Nothing special here, but this in case you if it gets damaged mostly by water, now you know how to do it. Okay, so next I'm gonna take off the viewfinder. Keep in mind the viewfinder has the optics in the viewfinders are plastic, especially the one inside the internal optics. There's no problem having them in plastic, but the one here, or where the eyepiece goes, also it's in plastic, and it's very very fragile, very delicate. So every time you clean it, you have to be very careful, otherwise you're gonna either scratch it or either take the coating that is on the lens. I might make a video in the future for showing you how to clean the optical optical viewfinder, the viewfinder at the eyepiece, eye point, and also internally. But most of the time, if there is any dust, we need to understand if that comes from the viewfinder or from the focusing screen, which most of the time is it's due to the focusing screen. The dirt, the dust particles are most likely to get stuck on the focusing screen rather than the optics of the viewfinder. Okay, so this is the last part of this video, the viewfinder. There were some other things that definitely could be covered, but they are very, to be honest, they are quite difficult to explain and to show. It might double the time of this video, and I will likely prefer to stop here. And I believe we took off almost everything, the most important parts from this camera. And if you have any questions, just use the comment section below. And also consider, if you're here for the first time, if you're still here actually, just consider to subscribe, share, subscribe, comment. Why not? I answer to every comments. I try to answer to everyone. Also, if you are about to open up for the first time a camera, you can just ask if what are the most important tools, which definitely the most important tool is the screwdriver. Otherwise you may not be able to open your camera, because a poor screwdriver, a cheap screwdriver, it may damage your screws and you might not be able even to start opening your camera. And for other things, just use, as I said, use the comment section below. And with this, see you in the next one.